make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
The other piece of this, though, is to be able to share your perspective, right? It's not just a one-way interview for the long-form, article about them in the New Yorker or whatever, You do need to be able to share your perspective, but you're going to be better placed to share that perspective once they have actually felt that you've come to that conversation in a genuine way, seeing them as a person and not as you're trying to show them the truth. Because a basic thing, and this is a negotiation thing, is if the role you give the other side is you're a Luddite and my job is to, educate you, guess what? No one wants to be in the role of Luddite.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you are watching for, just make sure that you are not driving. You're paying attention to the road, and welcome to another episode of Faithful Politics. Yes. I'm your political host, Will Wright, and joined by your always faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. What's going on, Josh?
Doing great. Thanks, Will.
Hey, and today,
doing much. Talking to you.
You're not doing much, and you're doing great. Hey, that's a twofer. Yes. And today we have with us Bob Bordone. You
got it.
Nailed it. That's it. Episode's over. I always have a problem with last name. So Bob Bordone, he's a USA Today bestselling author. He's senior fellow at the Harvard Law School and one of the country's leading experts on negotiation, mediation, and conflict resolution. And for more than 2 decades, he's actually helped organizations, governments, universities, and faith communities navigate the most difficult conversations, those that test our relationships and our values. And he's got a new book out called Conflict Resilience, which offers a hopeful guide for building the courage and skill to face disagreement without fear or hostility. And we're just so delighted to have you with us today, Bob. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Will and Josh. Great to be here.
So working in kind of the field of conflict resilience, I mean, that seems like a really specific field. Like when teachers were asking us, what do we want to be when we grow up in elementary school? Like that wasn't one of the choices. So I'm curious on like, what is it that brought you to this place where that's what you're studying?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I agree. If you would have asked me, I would not have said I would like to be a conflict resilience negotiation professor or teacher or writer. It came to me, I think, probably by the way many people who are doing things they're happy with, by some consequence of good fortune and maybe listening to some vocational call. But I thought maybe I wanted to be a lawyer, but didn't really even know if I wanted to be a lawyer, but somehow found myself as a miserable first-year law student at Harvard Law School, thinking, what on earth am I doing here? I am not enjoying any of this. I clearly don't want to be a lawyer. I'm now just going further into debt because I came into law school with debt. Now I'm going more into debt. And then I was really fortunate in my second year of law school to take a class on negotiation. And the class kind of blew up my world in all sorts of ways. I thought I was taking a class that was going to be about the tips and tricks to swindle and otherwise beat the other side. And everything about it was about listening and perspective taking and imagining a different world. I think that was at least in part because the founder of that program was a guy who fought in World War II and had his studies interrupted to go fight in World War II. And when he returned to finish his studies, discovered that all of his roommates were dead from the war.
Wow.
And so he committed himself to work that would advance the nonviolent resolution of conflict. And he was a really inspirational person and just had a profound impact on several generations of students and on the world as well. So I was very, very fortunate. But that's how I really came to want to do this work. I'll say one more thing about it. I also was really drawn to the interdisciplinary nature of it because law can be very siloed.
Yes.
Conflict is not siloed. It involves pretty much every academic background, obviously law, but like psychology, behavioral economics, brain science, game theory. And so that was also really attractive. And the fact that it can make kind of a real difference in lives, both at the kind of individual level, but also I think at the kind of family, organizational, country systems level.
I really, really love that. It reminds me of the kind of dialectic theory and argumentation theory, like Stephen Tolman, I think was his name. David Zarefsky's another guy, I think at Northeastern, that talks about this. And there's several other guys, and their names are slipping my mind right now. But I think about like the connection there with like argument really is about trying to figure out where the actual controversy is and what's happening and within that other person. So what's amazing about it is it's not like logic, because logic doesn't really work like it does on paper in the real world, right? Because we're emotional elephant, to the Jonathan Haidt reference, beings. And so I know that you've like studied this and you understand this. And I love the connection there. And I've actually read, Getting to Yes.
That's Roger Fisher. That's the guy.
Yes, Fisher. I love that. I've read several of his things. Difficult Conversations was another one. And just the theories in there. It's unbelievable. And I can't wait to get into that. But I want to kind of focus in on a question, because you've been teaching for so long. You're at Harvard. You have an impressive CV. What inspired you, or actually got you to realize that the biggest national crisis we're facing right now isn't policy, but it's how we actually talk to each other?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question.
How did you get there?
Yeah. So, I taught full-time at Harvard Law School for 21 years. Now I just teach in some exec ed programs. But I would say about a decade ago, more or less, I started to notice a perceptible shift in the way students at Harvard Law School were engaging, or perhaps, shall I say, not engaging with each other, both in and outside the classroom. And it was not just me who's noticed this. Other faculty would talk about it as well. Specifically, that it seemed that classrooms had become quite bland. Coincident with this observation, I was also on the admissions committee at Harvard Law School. So I knew, having read, each year hundreds of applications, that the boredom or the dullness was not because the law school was not putting a lot of time, energy, and effort to bring an incredibly interesting and diverse set of individuals to the school. When I say diverse, I mean in every way, including political viewpoint. So here we were spending time, energy, and money to create this quite artificial environment in an academic institution and getting none of the benefit. And so the question to me was, well, what is going on? Is it that people don't have skills? Now, I think that is a reason. In fact, I was teaching those skills, but I'm just one person. There are other people teaching it. But I thought it was deeper than that. And you only need to look more broadly than Harvard Law School students, right, to see that folks, sometimes intentionally, but also just because of a whole bunch of forces, right? And Jonathan Haidt talks about some of these forces in his work. We're finding it easier and easier to avoid the discomfort of disagreement. Certainly social media, right? And we can cultivate these cocoons of comfort. But then also we have the increased, I would say, cost of engaging across the proverbial aisle. Because if you said the wrong thing, you could be easily labeled and canceled in a way that you could never get yourself out of. And then add to that a growing polarization, which meant in particular that if you took the act of trying to engage across the political aisle, or any other kind of aisle, your people saw that as betrayal. So all of this, to me, right, was a serious and scary shift that I was seeing in my students, but I think you could look more broadly, right? And not just at the politics of the country, but at the way families engage. And so I got really curious about, quite apart from the skills, like, what is it that is making us less willing to either even enter into the room for conversation, to engage these really hard problems? And so I think that was for me like the start of the journey that took me from just teaching conflict resolution or difficult conversations or negotiation skills, all of which I do and love to do, but to be getting curious about, I would say, a quality that is prerequisite to doing all of those things. Because if you can know how to make a great French meal, but if you can't stand the heat of the kitchen, you will not get a great French meal.
That's really interesting. And as you're talking, like, I know what you're saying is true, because I'm sure anybody watching or listening to this knows a person that has a story that's similar to this. I stopped talking to this person because they voted X, Y, or Z, or, that person has a Trump flag in their yard, so I'm not going to say hi to my neighbor, or something to that extent. Like, I'm curious, like, how much of that is like, I guess it wouldn't really be conflict resilience, but like there does seem to be this like avoidance, like, I don't know, thing that we're all doing where it's like, I'm not going to talk to them because I know how I'm going to act. So instead I'm just going to stay over here. Like how do we work through that? And like, what does your book suggest as, one, a diagnosis, and then two, the treatment or medication we should take for that?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, the example you gave is one of the many examples we talk about in our book, right? I mean, it is maybe one of the hardest ones, which is, how do you engage across what feels like an ever increasingly challenging political divide in our country, in the United States. It doesn't have to be at that grand level, but I think that is a good example. And I think, and this is where I was really, honestly, very fortunate to, in the process of starting to talk about this, stumble across the wrong word, but start to work with somebody who was a friend who then became a colleague who is a brain scientist, because this book also brings in a lot of neuroscience here. And I think here's like a shift that happened from when I was in law school in the late 1990s to what I would say, again, started probably in the 20-teens, is that in the late 90s, there was this whole move around this idea of problem solving. That if we came together, we could creatively find some common ground. Fast forward to a moment when you think, just to use your example, Will, the person with the Trump flag, right? If you're like not a Trump supporter, you look and you think, I have nothing in common with that person. Like, that person is unhinged, right? Or you could take the opposite example, right? They're hopelessly woke and it's pointless. So if the prospect of finding some common ground is gone, then the question is, why bother? Because this is not easy work. I think this is where the brain science actually offers us some interesting answer, because our brains are hardwired to protect in the lowest cost possible way. But our brains will do hard work if it perceives something, and Judd Brewer at Stanford has written about this in various contexts. He coins this the BBO, the bigger, better offer. If your brain perceives something that is on offer, it will do something hard. For example, I live in Boston, right? The marathon is in April. It means you got to train in like the cold of winter in February. That's not comfortable or fun. But the BBO is I get to run the marathon. So then the question is, what is a BBO in a world where we don't see the possibility of finding common ground? And one of the things our book does, which I won't bore you with, I'm happy to get into it, but just for now, right, is we try to present there is a BBO here that is important for neighbors, to use your example, Will, political enemies, family members, and organizations. And if we can articulate and persuade you of that BBO, now your brain will be more willing to do something that's hard. Otherwise, we're not going to. And the reality is, it's much easier for me to just block you. Actually, it's even more easy for me to not just block you, put some kind of comment about your stupid, whatever I think is stupid, put a comment down, then block you, and then I get all the heart emojis from my people. All the endorphins are like rewarding me. So I don't know if that's responsive to your question, but I think
it is. And it made me think about, so I wrote a blog recently. I have a Substack, not to brag or anything, but I got a Substack. And it was called basically building narratives before building bridges. And it all sort of like focuses on this idea that you were just talking about. And I learned a fun word writing it, confabulation, which
what is it?
It's like this, it's our brain's ability to kind of create a narrative to help us explain things we don't understand. So like the examples, at least Jonathan Haidt used in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, they're a little bit coarse probably for this family show, but in essence, like he describes, confabulation as like our brains will fill in the blanks, will fill in the gaps when we see that Trump flag, in essence, or that we see that Black Lives Matter flag. We paint sort of this image and portrait, paint an entire narrative about somebody based on just very little minor details. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is like, if we were to sort of like rethink the BBO, not necessarily for like our own benefit, like running a marathon, but for like the benefit of others, like that could start to change things. But I don't know if am I categorizing your thesis correctly?
Yeah, I think that's right. Except I even think that the BBO could be for yourself. Right. So like to give you an example, I mean, I'm not sure when this episode's going to air, but as we're recording it, right, Thanksgiving is a few weeks off. I don't know if we're going to be before Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving.
Who knows?
We don't know. We don't know. Well, or maybe you're hearing this and the holidays are coming up or whatever, right? July 4th is coming up when you're hearing this, but whatever it is. But here's the thing, right? One of the really interesting things I hear people say is I'm going to avoid talking about immigration, whatever, the trans issue, climate change, guns, fill in the blank, when I go home for the holidays. And the reason why they're doing that is in service of the relationship. They're doing it in service of the relationship.
Yes.
And I'm highly sympathetic to that. At the same time, here's what I think. 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years of only talking about the apple pie and how great it was when starts to make for a pretty thin relationship. So the thing we're doing in service of the relationship, over time, not immediately, becomes the slow kill. And then grandma passes away, and suddenly we're focused on Billy's soccer game and we're not showing up. Or we're showing up, but we have to go home early to feed Rover because Rover's waiting. Now, so what is the antidote to that? Do I think the antidote to that is at the dinner table while we're eating the stuffing, bring up like the toughest issue? No. But here's what I do think. If you're home for, a few days and there's something about your older brother that has just made you feel really alienated, find some time, and you don't have to even get into the issue specifically, but even say, in the past, I feel like when we've tried to talk about X, it's been really hard for us. And I'm curious what your experience of that conversation has been. I'm curious what goes on in your mind around possibly engaging me. That kind of a conversation, even if it's not about the issue, opens up some really interesting space that actually creates some connective tissue. All this is to say, Will, that's for you. It's not just for them. And that's for the relationship. But we have to have like some curiosity and some capacity to do that, which is harder than talk about how great the apple pie is, watch 2 football games, get in the car and drive home.
Yes. It's absolutely harder. And I just absolutely love what you said, because I've heard in several conversations recently this sentiment, well, I don't really want to talk about that stuff, so I just don't. Like, I'm not, and then it normally something along the lines of like, basically, we're not going to change each other's minds.
Yeah. And
this has actually happened on like maybe 5 or 6 different occasions, honestly, in the last like month or two. And I was thinking, if it was one person, then I would think, oh yeah, that maybe, they, having a bad day or whatever, that's just their thing. But if it's like multiple people, then it starts to make me wonder, like, what's going on? And it's like, we just are so polarized, and partisanship is winning the day to the extent that we don't feel like we can talk about anything of substance anymore.
Yeah.
Because politics is not staying out there. It's now entered into the home.
Yeah.
And it's divided a home, and a house divided against itself can't stand. Yeah. That's Abraham Lincoln, but really it was Jesus. That's where he got it from. So boom, shout out to JC. So I would love, in this like sense, because like I'm thinking gearing up for Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
And maybe some people are out there and they're typing and they're like, man, I just got to find the right chart, the right study, the right Bible verse, my context, the right thing that it's going to convince Uncle Dan that of X, Y, and Z. And I'm coming ready. Like, I'm gearing up for the truth. Because there are some people, maybe they're thinking that, or they might be thinking in their mind, if only people would just show them the truth and they'll come around. How does that work in regular conversation, in the conflict resilience space?
Yeah, really badly. Right?
No.
Because here's the thing, right? I mean, at the end of the day, so there's like a negotiation piece to this, and then there's a conflict resilience piece to this. I think if your purpose ultimately is to persuade, which cosmically is not an awful purpose, but if your purpose around some of these issues is to persuade, I think you've kind of missed the point. Because, and you're always gonna find yourself frustrated. First of all, that's not a conversation or a discussion. That's a debate. And there's a place for a debate. But I'm not sure most of us really want to debate our family members that much. So it's the wrong way to prepare. I think that to the degree you want to find, and your purpose, I think, has to be twofold, right? One is, I want to try to understand their perspective better. Now, a lot of people say, but I don't. I don't want to understand their perspective. Okay. Well, what are you what are you hoping for with them? Like, if you persuade them, what is the thing you're going to get that you don't have? And I think the answer to that is something like, whatever, my brother back. Or the feeling that they're not crazy. Or that we were not, that just a reminder we were in fact raised in the same house. Whatever it is, right? Okay, so the thing you want back is just the confidence that this person you think you knew, you still kind of know. I think a better way to that is to get curious about what's driving them. And the other piece of this, though, is to be able to share your perspective, right? It's not just a one-way interview for the long-form, article about them in the New Yorker or whatever, You do need to be able to share your perspective. But you're going to be better placed to share that perspective once they have actually felt that you've come to that conversation in a genuine way, seeing them as a person and not as you're trying to show them the truth. Because a basic thing, and this is a negotiation thing, is if the role you give the other side is you're a Luddite and my job is to, educate you, guess what? No one wants to be in the role of Luddite. Put someone in a cruddy role, they're going to react badly to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I would think
It's
about it.
super helpful for me. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely very helpful. I'm thinking of a couple situations right now. I'm like, I should approach it differently next time.
It's hard. You know what? It's easy to teach and talk about this stuff. It's really hard to do in the moment. Right.
Yeah. How does, like, I don't know, our faith factor in the quest to be more resilient in our conflict? Because it seems like, I mean, our political debate is already bad, right?
Yeah.
Then you add, the religious angle, and it just seems like it's just throwing gasoline. So I'd love to just kind of get your take on, like, how does religion change things, if it does at all?
Yeah. I mean, I imagine your listeners come across from many faith traditions. I will say that, like, as somebody who comes from a Catholic Christian faith tradition, like, my work is animated by that. And in this way, right? I mean, I think in some sense, so speaking from a Christian perspective, Jesus was incredibly conflict resilient. So if you think about that moment when the woman who's, caught, I think, in adultery, and she's being asked, and Jesus being asked, the law says she should be stoned, right? He does not duck at all,
No.
right? I mean, he's writing something in the sand. We don't know what he's writing. I certainly don't know what he's writing. I don't think the scripture records that.
Yes.
But he confronts it very head on, and is the only person in that verse who actually even addresses the woman at all, right? So I think Jesus is somebody who, like, is a model for what does it mean to be conflict resilient, which is not to be avoidant. It's also not to not share your emotions, because he also shares emotions, right? He both weeps, right? We see him weeping at times. We also see him pretty angry at times. But I also think that, again, I'm speaking, here from a Christian perspective, and, using that story again, right? He's the one who sees the woman. So he is usually like the one who sees the humanity past the label, sees the Samaritan, right? And so I think, like, a lot of this work, and it's hard, right? If we think about, if I invited all your listeners now your ratings are going to go way down here. Think about the person that they least like. They're like, I don't want to think about that person right now. But when I think about that person, like, it is hard to kind of imagine that somewhere in there is the image and likeness.
Yes.
The first 4 chapters of our book, I focus a lot on what we call the negotiation within, or the internal conflicts and the internal work. Because I think that if you can't do that internal work, it's quite hard to do the behavioral things that we offer in the later chapters of the book. Or at least it's hard to do it in a way that will come across as authentic and sincere, as opposed to stilted and trained. And people can see right through that.
I'd love to ask you a little bit about that internal work, because, so you mentioned you're a Catholic. You're also a member of the LGBTQ community. Josh and I come from different, like, backgrounds, upbringing. We're on different sides of the argument, and we don't have to, like, litigate it here, obviously. But my reading of the Bible and my understanding of that, plus just me just being a lib, right? So, like, I don't have any, like, that's not a conflict for me. Like, if I were gay and I was a Christian, I wouldn't be conflicted. I don't know where you are, but I know that is a conflict for a lot of people. And I'd love for you to maybe just walk us through what that conflict is for you, if there is one. And then how does that, translate into the work you do, like, with conflict resilience?
Yeah. I mean, certainly it was a conflict for a very long time, right? For those of you, your listeners who know, Catholic teaching is definitely, Catholic teaching says, yes, LGBT people exist, but they are not called to act on that, right? So there's a wrestling if you want to take in this case, as a Catholic, right, your church teaching seriously. and also
Sure.
what you kind of feel like you know about yourself seriously, and what does that mean? And I think in some sense, kind of wrestling with that for me is probably a big reason why I ended up broadly doing conflict work, although I don't think I was like aware of that as I was doing it. It's over time you become aware of that.
Right.
And I think, and we talk about this in the book, not from a LGBT Catholic perspective, but just that we often have signs of ourselves that feel in conflict and that may get coded by dint of religion or family or culture or even just workplace culture as good, bad, evil, right, wrong. And that those are perhaps just too simplistic, and that part of being able to handle them well is to just actually acknowledge them all and give them some voice and bring them into the room. And there's something about the authenticity of that is disarming. And I think that I've experienced that. And am I certain? I mean, listen, I've never had a moment like Paul where a lightning bolt knocked me off a horse or whatever he was on, a camel or something, right? I have a lively
one of
sense
those
of faith.
Animals.
Right. What is that?
One of those animals.
One of those animals, yeah. Yeah. I have a lively sense of faith. But if you said to me, am I 100% sure every single time in my life, every single moment about my faith? No, that would be a lie. Similarly, right, like through my own prayerful discernment, like I have like a reasonably good conscience about where I have landed, like what's okay in relationships. But if you said, are you 100% sure? Did you get a message from God? No, I did not. Wish I had that certainty in both. This is where it is. This has come from like discernment. And that I think, I'm not saying this came easily, right? And it can be shaken up in different moments. But there's something about putting that forward that makes it less destabilizing, is more authentic, and I think often invites a less rehearsed response from people who see it differently. Like a less like, let me pull out the scripture and pick my verses, or let me pick out this encyclical and show it to you. Not that isn't relevant.
Right.
But it invites something more human. And ultimately the Spirit works in mysterious ways. So I feel a little bit bad for your listeners now who maybe are not from a Catholic tradition, because we kind of went down that path a little bit.
No, I appreciate it. I love hearing your perspective on that. It helps me think about like my own perspective. And, I think one of the things that I try to do like in my own heart and mind is I'm trying to separate, like, even for me, like issues of theology versus issues of just basic human rights. And it's like, and so like the reason I'm mentioning this is like my perspective is changing, even though in theology, I've seen many arguments and I haven't been convinced intellectually. And yet there's this other side of a natural law or civic and another way, almost like a pluralistic, right, society, thinking about this idea that we live with other people that think very differently from us.
Yeah.
And so conflict is inevitable because people want to live their lives and everyone wants to live their life. And then we have powerful people that want us to not like each other because it makes us very moldable and very controllable. Maybe that's just a soapbox for me. But one of the things that I'm thinking about is like, we have to start with relationship, but you're like, but think about facts. Isn't there some standard? Isn't there something that we can look at? Isn't there something that's kind of even what I mean with the civic? Like, isn't there a standard that we can look at that can be shared and accessible to everyone?
Yeah.
And figure that out. And yet it seems like misperception and this thing that you touch on, I believe, called identity threat. They get in the way many times of what's going on. And I would just love to hear from you, like, what's going on? Like, what drives it? This sense that we have to defend within a conversation instead of listening and then being willing to share our own thoughts and ideas without fear.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. There's a lot in that question.
I know. Just respond to whatever you want.
No, it's a wonderful question, right? I mean, especially even the last, prepositional phrase you did, without fear. Because I do think it starts there. That part of what makes entering into the conversation as a conversation, as opposed to either a debate or a verdict on who I am or who you are, or a verdict on our friendship or relationship or whatever it is, so hard is fear, right? That this really is, that at the end of this, I might be debunked, or I might win, or I might learn that actually you're as bad as I thought, or that you see me as unworthy, flawed. So it feels to me like part of this is we have to kind of lower the stakes of these conversations. Is the conversation giving us information? Of course. But the information is, there's something to learn. There's somewhere to grow. There's something to mull. There's something to kind of reflect on. It doesn't need to be wrapped up today, right? In our book, we talk about the challenge of, you guys probably have this, you have to probably do it on these podcasts, right? At the end of the podcast, you have to wrap it up in a bow. But we don't have to wrap up all of our conversations in a bow. And that's okay. It can be raw. So I think there's something about lowering the cost. There's something about, and then about having the right conversation. So what do I mean by that? I was recently on a podcast where I actually coached somebody live who put herself out to be coached. And long story short, she had a long time affiliation as a political progressive. During COVID, became much more conservative, actually writes for the Free Press. And in the process has become alienated from some of her friends. And she wanted to have a conversation with one of her friends. And it was the particular topic she wanted to have it on was around gender affirming care, where she actually has strong views that there's like, it's not appropriate. People, rush to do these things. But just in talking to her, like what I realized is that was like the wrong conversation. Like the conversation was really about how can we respect each other? How can we see each of each other as still kind of caring, intelligent, thoughtful people? And what does that look like? And what does having a conversation about any of these harder topics mean for that? Because if the stake of the conversation is either you will yield to my facts or my assessment about you was completely wrong, I don't know how you have that. I don't know how that conversation could possibly be a win.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's hard. Again, easier said than done.
Is it more like, and we can use that same example or a different one, but it's like somebody may want to get to a destination. That destination is, hey, I want to reconcile this relationship, friendship, what have you. But the vehicle you choose will be important because you could either go from point A to B on a unicycle, which requires a lot more training, a lot more balance, and it's going to take you longer to get there. Or you can be in the, souped up car or whatever like that, which will get you there much safer, quicker. And it sounds like for me, like you're saying that the gender conversation might be an important one, but that's not the best vehicle to get you to where you're going. Is that accurate?
I think that's right. I mean, I think that because one of the things, I mean, if you end up not sending people to other podcasts, but like one of the things this person says in the beginning is, my purpose is to persuade her. And I was like, well, why do you want to persuade her? Like, what is that? What is it? But what she really wanted was like a sense that she was actually in a conversation. Because what came up was this feeling that all she got regurgitated back was like a chat GPT answer of somebody who had the progressive view on this. So what she really wanted was a feeling that she was being taken seriously in a conversation and not just getting the rehearsed lines. I think it's figuring out at some deep level, what do we really want here, and what is it that we can be curious about? Josh, your earlier question was, aren't there some things that are true, right? And I believe a lot of things are true that half the listeners here would not believe are true. But I could pick one that probably most listeners would agree to, which would be that the Earth is round. Although you probably have some listeners who don't think the Earth is round.
Probably.
Right? Most people still think the Earth is round. Or roundish, or at least not flat, right? So if we use that as the example, what do you do with somebody who says the Earth is flat? Like, are we curious about getting into a conversation with them about the Earth is flat? Is there any chance we're going to be persuaded that the Earth is flat?
Now, if they were like applying to NASA, I would probably have a much more vested, interest in whether the Earth was flat or not.
Then the question is, because that's how some people feel about fill in the blank. The election was stolen. The election wasn't stolen. Climate change is caused by humans. No, it isn't. Right? Whatever. You could fill in a whole list of things that people would say. So then what is it you can be curious about? Can you be curious about how they came to see that view? Can you be curious about what they say about people who think the world is round? Like, what do you think of those people? Like, and how did they get, duped by these supposed pictures from the moon? You can't do that. You can't have that conversation if you're not curious about it. But I would think, is there something I could be curious about if I'm not curious about their scientific explanation for why the Earth is flat?
Oh,
I love it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, one of the things I love the most about what you just said is that obstacle to be curious. I think actually, is one of the reasons we probably don't have as many conservative voices on our show, because I think that guests might find it hard for us to ask them about anything else outside of, issue X, or whatever. And we know that like people's instincts, like they'll see faithful politics and immediately think that we're like some right leaning, whatever, kind of show. And I get it. Like the name doesn't do our show justice, but it does describe like who we are. Like he's the faithful host and I'm the political host. Yeah. So yeah, that was just a comment. I do just want to ask you just a quick question about the title of your book, because we haven't really gotten to that yet. It's called Conflict Resilience, not Conflict Resolution. Yeah. Like is that intentional?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So when we say resilience, what we really mean, because the subtitle of the book is Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In. So just to be clear, we give a lot of advice on how to problem solve, but the book is not primarily focused on that. It's about how do we develop this leadership capacity, right? Which we think is akin to like emotional intelligence, conflict resilience, right? How do you, this capacity to just sit with that discomfort of the disagreement, to listen with actual curiosity, and to speak your experience that is authentic, but in a way that maximizes the chances it lands with the other. That's what conflict resilience is. We think it is prerequisite to at least peaceful conflict resolution. It's not a prerequisite for conflict resolution, because a war could resolve a conflict as well.
Right.
Or I could just cave in. That resolves conflict. But it is prerequisite to kind of peaceful and genuine conflict resolution or negotiation or problem solving or any of the other things. So I don't know if that's helpful. I mean, somebody who
it's very helpful
wrote to me and said, in some weird way, your book should be read before you read Getting to Yes.
Nice.
Getting to Yes is how do you do it?
Right.
Your book is, again, like you have to have some capacity to actually go into the room, right?
Yes.
And if you can't go into the room, it doesn't really matter if you and ChatGPT can do it. You know?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, like, so one of the things that, you know, I'm thinking about the pushback that I might get, because in the pushback I do get when I'm talking about like, hey, let's push into some of this conflict and kind of try to resolve it, trying to figure out how do we understand together, because understanding precedes any truly constructive conflict. And so, but people, I'll hear this a lot. I don't want to start a conflict, and I just want to be nice. I'm just going to smile. I'm going to be nice. And then I'm gonna move on.
Yeah.
Why is that a bad strategy? Why can't I just be like, hey, you know what? I don't even want to worry about this, and I'll just be nice.
Yeah.
And because I do that all the time, I'm a people pleaser, so that's probably part of it. Is that it's bringing that, you know, that engine of people pleasing, just putting fuel in there, and so that's not necessarily a good thing. But like, how do we, I'm asking because I struggle with this so much. I just want to be nice, be civil. But then sometimes it feels like the actual conflict isn't named, or it's not genuine. It's not authentic.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Love this question. So here's what I would just say on this is that, I mean, most of the time in lots of day-to-day moments, being nice is the right answer, or saying yeah is the right answer. Like what I'm proposing when we talk about this is hard, exhausting work. So I would not want to be misheard as conflict resilience means engaging all of these people all of the time and being avoidant, saying yeah, or being nice is the wrong answer. Here's what I would say, however. I don't know why I'm pointing at you. Here's what I would say.
Please.
For the issues, the times when it's keeping you up at night, when it's wearing on your soul and your heart and your mind, that's when you need this skill. So it is indispensable for us to have really good and healthy relationships if we are not conflict resilient at times around some hard things.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something we should be always doing in everything that comes up? No, exhausting. You don't have time for it. No. Is it something? It's really interesting because I love your question, Josh, because I feel like usually, like if I'm talking to someone like who's more on the progressive left, you know what they say to me? Why should I waste my time and energy with someone who is completely closed off and unhinged? So they don't say nice; they just say this is not worth it, right? And and often, right, I think what's in their mind is, why should I be subjected to, trauma, harm, abuse?
Right. Sorry, I didn't mean
No, I'm not saying trauma, harm, abuse. I'm saying discomfort. I'm saying that was hard and didn't immediately send positive endorphins into my brain.
Right.
And we have to expand like our Venn diagram of what that is, in the same way that for the person who just always wants to be the people pleaser, Yeah, but you know what? We need to expand this. So to me, the question, like I'd say, is it keeping you up at night? Are you doing a lot of on the one hand and on the other hand and on the other hand? Well, then all you're really doing is keeping the conflict in your head instead of inviting the other people into it, which is actually a more respectful thing to do. And then, the other question I ask is not, can my uncle or the other person on the church committee or whatever do this with skill? No, I mean, forget it. I mean, even people who teach us stuff don't always do it with skill. But I think it is worth asking, can they come to this with some scintilla of goodwill and good faith? I think if the answer to that question is no, maybe you do avoid, or maybe take another course. But if it's just they're rough, and they're not good at this, but I think they're like a decent chap. Okay.
I like that actually a lot. I really appreciate that. It's number one, it's been awesome to have you on the show, Bob. Thank you so much for coming. How can people pick up this book, and how can they follow you and get involved in what you're doing? I'd love for you to kind of do your shameless plug and sell for what you're doing right now.
Well, thanks, Josh. And thanks to both of you for having me. And yes, you can get this book. It's called Conflict Resilience. It is available on Amazon and wherever you buy your books, or you can go to conflictresilience.com. You could also learn more about me at my website, which is bobbordone.com. So yeah, if any of this is of interest, and any of you buy and read the book, I love feedback on it. So,
well, thank you so much, Bob. And to our viewers, guys, thank you for joining us. And we're going to put links to all of these websites and places to find Bob in the description notes. So check the show notes for that. Like, subscribe, do all that great stuff. And until next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Thanks, and God bless.